Welcome to Dead Headspace, a part of Silver Shamrock's Horrorcast, a podcast network that includes Killing Time with Silver Shamrock and Unburying the Dead, where we exhume classic horror paperbacks for the new generation. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hi, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
And today we're mainly focusing on mentorship with Lee Murray. Did I pronounce your surname correctly?
Yes, that's fine.
All right, and I should have asked both of you before recording, but we are recording. So, Daron Kappauff, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Nailed it.
You nailed it. All right, so we're with Lee Murray and Daron Kappauff. Say hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
And you know what? We would love to know, and whoever wants to answer this first, go for it. What got you guys into horror?
Go ahead, Daron.
Oh, wow. Well, I am fairly new to horror. I've been a reader for forever. But it was honestly my friend Kevin who introduced me to independent horror novels. Jonathan Jan's Children of the Dark was my first horror book I ever read, like 2 years ago. And it just, he constantly would talk about the books that he loved, and he had read a short story I had written a few years prior that was horror, and he really liked it and wanted me to just sort of dive in with both feet and take a stab at it. So
fantastic. How about you, Lee?
Yeah, I think I was kind of raised on horror, Pinocchio and Grimm's Tales and stuff like that, and I always say, there's nothing like, a cautionary tale for children that involves skinning badly behaved children and making them into drums. So I kind of, I think as children, we're kind of raised on it to a certain extent. But I started my writing career as a chicklet writer. I wrote a really fun, I kind of got sucked into that, write what you know. And so I wrote this really fun chicklet story, and it did okay, and it just was great fun. I learned so much from doing that first book. But I realized in the process that actually I didn't want to write about wardrobe malfunctions and cupcake deprivation. I actually wanted to write about really meaningful things. And I mean, that's what horror is about. It's addressing the fears. It's addressing the things that really matter to us, and those things change all the time, or they change depending on your geography, your social group, all of those sorts of things. And so it kind of is a natural progression, I think, to go darker, because we want to explore those things that are relevant and topical and important to people, those universal things. And, not everybody cares about cupcakes, but everybody cares about, pandemics and urbanization and climate change and all of those things that you can address with horror fiction. So, I think that's probably where where my evolution towards horror has come. I think it's been natural. And also, as someone who suffers from anxiety and depression, I think that it's a wonderful creativity, and particularly horror, is a wonderful way to get those demons on the page and sort of exercise them. Once you've created that distance and they're on the page, you can sort of tame them in some way. It's hard to quite describe this, but the process of just getting it on the page can be really, really valuable in dissipating some of that stress.
Lee, I love how you said, you wanted to write something meaningful. And, the reason I really kind of latch on to that is because there's so many people who would look at somebody who writes what they term genre fiction and not necessarily call it meaningful, but the way you kind of went on to describe horror as, and I'm kind of putting words in your mouth, but like an exploration of life. What could be more meaningful than that?
Absolutely. And there is a bit of snobism, isn't there, around horror? I was having this conversation with Karina Bissett the other day over just over an email, and she's curating this amazing anthology on landscape and dark fiction around landscape. So that's going to be exciting. But we were talking about this and about how there's this real kind of literary pressure, that horror is not really proper writing. It's not real writing. And, when I say to people, I write horror, they go, oh, I don't read that stuff. Oh, no. And then you say, well, have you read Margaret Atwood? And they go, oh, yes. And, have you read Edgar Allan Poe? Well, everyone's read Poe, and so then you go down the list and they've read everything you mentioned. And because I think horror is just so universal, it is a spectrum, from, and I always say it's from just that unease, that through the looking glass darkly, all the way up to sort of eyeballs on a plate. It's anywhere on that spectrum. And so, we're all, it's so universal. It's just so universal. So I think actually that snobism isn't warranted, and writing good horror is actually really hard. It's actually really hard.
And you could make the argument as well that anything that, that snobism holds up as true literature is going to have elements of horror in it, and as well, if it's properly explored. Daron, I want to throw something to you. Now, before we jump into mentorship, I feel like, having read the articles that you guys did for Kendall Reviews, I feel like it's really important for people to know a little bit about your day job as a content editor. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So tell us your background there.
Well, so I went to school for literature for my bachelor's, and I have an MFA in writing. I did some work as a technical / copywriter for a few years, and then I moved into the more online content writing, and then up to editing. It's basically I work for a large e-retailer, basically, and we write all of our own content, shoot our own videos, things like that. So it's everything is ours. There's nothing we don't use. If you go to Amazon, you're going to see the same description on Amazon that's on that manufacturer's webpage. They just copy and paste it and just slap it up. Whereas we spend a lot of time getting to know the products and writing about them so that we answer your questions before you ever even have them.
I kind of wanted to set that up right from the get-go, because there's certain aspects I know we're going to get into today where we talk about let's say your eye for detail, and how your relationship with Lee has kind of approached that in your writing. But as far as jumping right in, Pat, I'm going to throw it to you.
Yeah, so mentorship, it's something we've talked about before, but we've only kind of vaguely talked about it. Like I've mentioned, I got two guys I look up to as mentors, Ronald Kelly and Mark Cassell. They're both, I feel like, excellent teachers and writers in their own right. So I was lucky enough to fall into that. But before we dive into how people can approach a mentorship, let's just talk about how you got into it. And this is covered in your article, I know that, but for those that haven't read it yet, can you tell us anything you want about how you started into the mentorship program with the HWA?
With the HWA? Oh, I just signed up.
Or it could be before that.
Yeah, basically, one of the first things I did when I was starting out as a writer, I applied for a mentorship with the New Zealand Society of Authors, and I was assigned one with an iconic New Zealand writer. Amazing man, Graham Lay is his name, and he worked with me, and he helped me get one of my first novels out. Wonderful, experienced writer. He has, I think, 60 novels out and a number of non-fiction books, and he was the books editor for one of our national magazines here in New Zealand, so really knew his stuff. And so as a result of that program, I thought, well, now, I got so much out of it. I went back to the program and said, well, can I become a mentor? What can I do, when I got a little bit further ahead? And so I became a mentor, and then I became a convener of the program, and I became a selector of the program. And so I'm the only person in the country who's probably done all elements of that particular program. And I just got so much out of it. You get something out of both sides of the equation. And so, I introduced those programs into the New Zealand SpecFic group, and also I've been involved in the Australian Horror Writers Association mentorship group, and it was kind of about time that I put my hand up for the HWA. So Brian Hatcher was the convener at the time. So it's just changed, and Greg Faherty's taken it over. But he put a call out and said, "We're short, we're down, X number of mentors this year, and we really need some help." And so I put my hand up, and I got the last 3, that hadn't been matched up or whatever on the list, and they were an amazing bunch. So I was very, very lucky. So that's how I met Daron.
Now, before we go into how Daron entered it and what went behind the scenes on his end that led to him becoming a mentoree. Now, Lee, you talked about having depression and anxiety. I've only recently kind of realized that I am plagued with anxiety all the time too. It's pretty bad to the point where I'm medicated, and that's only been within the last year or so. So I totally get that, on top of like ADD, or I guess it's ADHD now. I'm curious if being a mentor is kind of a way to, I don't know how else to word this, but if it's kind of a alleviator or a counterbalance with those two things.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it depends. Like it's work, it's extra work, but then it is just so rewarding when you get your mentees with this aha moment, and they go, "Oh my God, I get it! I look," and then they send you something that's just amazing, and you think, "Wow, you had a hand in that. You made a difference," and that feedback, that positive feedback, is wonderful for us when we're suffering from. It's a real thing. It's when you're suffering from depression and you get this really very positive, you are valued, you did something that was helpful to someone. There is nothing like giving to make you feel good, right? So so although you do have to create boundaries, because mentorship is forever. You never get a mentee and it's just for the 4 months that they assign the mentee. I just need to tell you that I've still got mentees from 10 years ago that still contact me and say, "Look, now I've got this issue, and what do you think?" And it's a relationship. So they become friends and peers, and some of them surpass you, which is even more wonderful. And I just think, so there's an element of connection, friendship, and that wonderful feeling of you've actually contributed and you've done something of value. And I think with depression and anxiety, we just don't feel valued. We feel, we feel isolated and helpless and useless and hopeless. And then you have this mentee going, no, this was really good. This works, look, and now I've seen it in this book and this book and this. You're sharing stories, Daron and I will tell you, we just, "Have you read this?" Okay. And then off Daron went, and then I'd read something. He'd say, "What about this?" And so off we'd go. So it's a conversation. And so it is connection. It's all of those things.
Yeah, like you said before we started recording, and all that's beautiful what you just said. I love it. I don't mean to just like totally bypass that. I don't know what else to say. It's beautiful what you just said. But before you started recording, you said we were friends for a while on Facebook and stuff, and we were. And what I've noticed is that you're always very positive, and that I'll tell you, indirectly or directly, that's very helpful, because there's a lot of rabbit holes that can drag you down a very bad path real quick on the internet. So
I think you're
changing a lot of things.
But Patrick, I think that authenticity, it's only been really in the last few years. In fact, I wasn't diagnosed till I was nearly 50. So, it's only been in the last sort of few years that I've actually come clean about having depression and anxiety. And actually, that's actually quite freeing as well. And you may well find that now, having, actually letting people know that there's a reason. you might not want to see them today, and you might be struggling, and people understand, especially this last couple of years. I mean, it's, point to me to someone who hasn't had a down moment in the last couple of years, because I don't know any, so.
It's really nice to hear that, and I like talking about it because it's not a taboo thing, but it makes us feel worse when we keep it inside. And like, me and Daron are good buddies, and I told him yesterday when we were talking, like, he reaches out more often than not to me, and I feel like I'm a bad friend. And it's not me fishing for compliments, but like, that's anxiety. And I've done that shit with Brennan too, and it feels good that I know that I'm not a crazy person, because it's been years that I thought I was just a shitty friend, and I just gotta thank you for being a positive contributor in that aspect. So thank you. Daron, how did you kind of say, I want to try this, I want to be a mentoree?
Well, it goes back to how I got into horror. It all kind of happened within a year or so. Once I started actually writing, I wrote, I think, about 2 full drafts of my novel that Leah and I worked on together. And my friend Kevin, again, he joined. I didn't even know the HWA existed, let alone what it was. So he joined it, and he started talking about it, and I was like, well, that's interesting. So I started doing some research, because he was like, you should join. I was like, okay, I don't even know what it is, but so I started researching it, reading the website, and then while I was going through it, I stumbled onto the mentor section of it, where it talks about what you're able to do with a membership, and that was, to me, that I was like, well, this is worth whatever, $50 a year. Like, that alone is worth way more than that. Like, so I did it. I signed up. And once I finished that second, actually I was almost finished with the 3rd draft. That's when I signed up for that particular session. And then, all downhill from there.
And I noticed, said mentoree, correction, mentee, mentee. Is that how?
Yeah, he's the baby. Mentee.
Yeah.
Mentee. Yeah, mentee. It's a weird word. So, okay, we got Daron signed up. Lee, you're signed to him. Take us through what that was, the initial process of you guys being introduced to each other.
Actually, Brian has a little bit to do with that. So it's not just a matter of just, oh, here's a mentor, here's someone who's willing to mentor, and here's a mentee, go for it. It doesn't quite work like that. So what actually happens is the convener needs to actually match the mentees to the mentors and the projects. And sometimes, people don't have a rapport, or the mentee's not ready. They still need some work. They need to do a bit more work before they're ready, or they're not quite open and ready to jump in. And, basically I threw knives at Daron for months and months and months, no!
With very precise accuracy.
And so I think that the convener has a lot to do with actually matching the right project and the right person. So you don't have to be a New York Times bestseller to be a mentor. You just have to have been through the process and have something to offer. And the same for the mentees. You just need to come with the right mindset, because I'm not Daron's mother. I'm not going to say there, Daron, it's all good, because that's not my job, So there's a lot of that. So kind of, I think I primed Daron a little bit. So I kind of said, okay, sounds like this is what I've been told. You've got this novel, your beta readers have read it. It stands up in terms of plot, but it's not quite there in terms of readability. I think that was the word you used, Daron, yeah. Readability. And so rather than read the whole thing to start with, I said, okay, he thinks the plot stands up, and we looked at the synopsis just to be sure. And then we dived right in, but we actually had a conversation first. I looked at some first few chapters and gave Daron a bit of a heads up of where I thought the issues were. And then we had an actual chat. And then we went chapter by chapter, sort of churning through stuff and throwing things at each other. Read this. What do you think? Is this going to work? Because he had some structural issues that he was still grappling with. We knew the plot held up, but we still wanted to know how best to tell the story. So, but basically, you know, we kind of met. We were both excited about the project. I also write, you know, supernatural crime noir, so that fit nicely. So I was excited to read it. And yeah, we kind of hit it off and away we went, sort of, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. Brennan, you got anything to throw in there?
Yeah, you know what? One of the things that really caught my eye, and Daron, this is kind of directed at you, but Lee, I'd be happy to hear you jump in if you've got something to add. You talked about how becoming a mentee really transformed your work ethic, and I immediately after I read that, I was taken back to my days at music school, and you know, trying to force myself to practice my instrument, but really making the best progress and setting myself up into a routine when I had to kind of meet with a teacher once a week and, you know, kind of go over progress and work towards certain goals. So that's what that really reminded me of. I was hoping you would speak a little bit about, you know, the way this transformed your work ethic as far as writing is concerned.
Sure. Yeah. So before I started the mentorship, I basically was only writing 1 day a week. With the way I'd set up my schedule, I'm pretty lucky in that I can literally create my own schedule. I can work whenever I want. So I basically work 4/10s, and I don't work Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So I had dedicated Friday to writing. So it was like a work day, except I was writing instead of going to work. And I pumped the novel out, three drafts that way, and it took a while. Probably took a couple of years, honestly, to do it that way. But then, yeah, once we started, and Lee read the first few chapters. We met. We talked on the phone like this, and she went through all the things. You know, I had said, hey, I think these are the issues, but I'm not exactly sure how to fix them. I'm struggling with the solution. And yeah, she caught it right away. We started talking about it, and like as soon as that aha moment happened, when I was like, oh, that makes all the sense in the world. How did I miss that? I wanted to dive back in and start making those changes, and then that sort of snowballed, right? So I'd rewrite a chapter, I'd send it to Lee, I'd get notes back within 12 hours half the time, sometimes within a couple hours, and like, even though sometimes it's like you got to cut all this, I was still energized and excited, and just wanted to keep it going. So from there, I basically started writing every day. You know, I've got 2 toddlers, so it's hard to get anything done during the day. So basically, every night after I put them to bed, I just come sit in the office for hours and just write. And yeah, so I wanted to rewrite the entire novel during our session because I didn't want it to go over because I know how busy Lee is. So I was like, I'm going to get this done, and it just sort of created that work ethic that's just stuck. Now, even if I'm not sending her something, which I haven't in a while, I still have that feeling, right, of getting something done, and it feels good. So.
Yeah, I would add that I think, and I don't know how other mentors work, but I feel partly there's a bit of advantage. I live in New Zealand. I'm already in the future, so I've already, you know, seen it before you sent it to me. But I have this notion that if you are working on something and you get immediate feedback, it is really very helpful because you're still in the moment of writing it. And so I always try and send things back within a day or 2 at the most, so that the mentee has that opportunity to look at those two pieces of work together while it's still fresh in their mind. And that can be really, I think, very helpful. And it certainly worked for Daron, and I know it has worked for a number of my other mentees. I mean, and also let's just have a shout out here for the spouses who are fantastic while we're trying to get words on the page, and, you know, with family and commitments. And I think that, you know, Daron's partner was really, you know, he sort of said to her, look, I've got this opportunity and I want to take it, you know, and someone other than my mother is reading my writing, and, you know, and they're liking it. So we should, you know, we should do more with this. So, you know, he really made the most of the opportunity. I mean, there's not a moment he didn't waste. And we were reading widely as well. It wasn't just a question of writing. We were studying other things, looking at different articles. And I think that's the whole point of a mentorship, isn't it? Is to progress the work, and Daron really embraced that, and I thank him for it, because that makes for a wonderful experience for both of us.
Pat, I thought you were jumping in. I'm sorry, man.
No, I'm sorry. I was really lost in this, or not lost. I was really transfixed on this conversation with you guys. I don't know what I was going to follow up, man. You threw me off. Brennan.
That's okay. So I'm curious, Lee, from your standpoint, I know you've already talked about some of the benefits of being a mentor, because, it's not just all giving. You definitely receive as well. And, of course, kind of the mainstay is that feeling of, having helped somebody, having made a difference. But what are some of the other benefits that somebody considering going into this should kind of look into or expect to get?
Yeah, well, first of all, you get to read other people's work and see how they do things. There's no one way to write a novel or a short story or a novella or whatever. There's no one right way. And so, exploring these new ways and new techniques is really valuable. And I learned things in the process. Daron has a different sort of style to me, and we discussed various things, and some of the things he kept because they're his style, and so you learn a lot on the hoof, if you like, and you learn techniques that work for you and things that don't work for you, and so it's writing is just evolving all the time. We don't write the way we did 200 years ago. If you read, I don't know, Mary Shelley's The Last Man, it's not the same as, some kind of dystopian fiction that you're reading coming out of this pandemic, for example. So writing and ways to engage the reader are changing all the time. And so, every time I get a new mentee, I learn something else. So there's that aspect. But also I just make a lot of friends. And the other thing is that I'm really crap at promoting myself, and Daron's going around telling everyone that Lee Murray is the biz,
True.
And so I just got this one time, for at least for a little while, I've got this fan, and then next minute he'll be the bestseller and I'll be the fan. But for the moment, I have this fan, and that's fabulous, and it's wonderful to have to have these other people that when you spread the love, basically, because I'm really, really, really crap at promoting myself. So there's that as well. And I mean, if I'm known as being someone in the community who's kind, that's not so bad.
That's a
Not
really
so bad
good
at
thing.
all. So, Lee, would it be fair to say that, do you feel like it gives you an advantage as, let's say a veteran writer, somebody who knows what they're doing in the game, to kind of force yourself to make time to read up and coming writers? Do you feel like that gives you almost an advantage over other people who have been doing this and might almost be kind of locked inside their own head?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know. I kind of possibly, yeah. I mean, you understand what the struggles are, what the issues are that new writers are dealing with. But I mean, I'm reading widely anyway. I'm on some literary award juries, etc., etc. So I tend to read pretty widely anyway. And you just, yeah. So yes, there is that. But I think for a lot of mentors who are working in this field, they're already reading widely. They're writing as well, so they're staying current. But you're right. That's another benefit. You do stay current with your genre. What are people writing? What's what are the issues? And I think that because fears change. I mean, let's face it. We're going to see this glut of pandemic type stuff coming through in the next year because everyone's dealing with isolation. Dealing with these fears of even your neighbor is your enemy, really, when you're talking about a pandemic. So some of these things are interesting. They are, the genre is always evolving. So yes, it is a way to stay current.
I almost looked at it kind of from the lens I look at doing this podcast, because you said, you read widely, and so did, pretty much any author who values their craft. They're going to read a lot, as much as they can. But you have the opportunity to not just read these up and coming writers, but to pick their brains as well, to say, that's really neat. How did you arrive at that, in addition to kind of laying your experience on them? So that's kind of how I arrived at that, thought.
Oh, yeah, it's two-way, it's like I don't have all the ideas, I don't have, and also, there are very few new ideas, it's how do you subvert them in a way that is fresh. And I mean, we talked about this a couple of times, because Daron's book does involve the occult, and it's been done, right, Daron? But we had to do it in a way that was really fresh and vibrant and jumped off the page. And I think Daron's achieved that. But we did talk about, is this seem too cliche? Is this too traditional? How can we make the pace better? Those sorts of things. So yes, absolutely. I totally agree, Brennan. That's a really good benefit.
Yeah, it's good. It's good when your mentor. That's a good point that you bring up. Like, yeah, it's good to have a supporter, but to kind of direct them and indicate, like, that's cliche. Or something that Mark Cassell taught me was tautology. I think I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
Something
repetition.
Something I don't really do this anymore, but where I write like shaking my head, or just stuff where you're like, yeah, that's you don't need to say that twice. It's really silly. That's really important too for having a mentor. What I've noticed, Lee. Let's just talk about you for a little bit, since you just said you're crap at promoting yourself. So let's talk about. First off, audio listeners, behind Lee, framed up, is a horror writers. I think 2019 was at your mentorship finalist award.
No, that's a Bram Stoker. I haven't got any. I haven't framed this year. No, that's a Bram Stoker Award finalist. So I have 5 of those now. I haven't no time winner, but 5-time finalist. But this is the HWA Mentor Award, and it's as heavy as hell. So it must have cost a fortune to post to New Zealand. And
What is
that? It's the HWA Mentor of the Year trophy.
No, I mean, like, what's it supposed to be?
Oh, who knows? Wings, maybe? Because, I'm the wind beneath your wings, or something. Like, good question. It's very pointy and sharp, so could draw blood. I could use it on my next mentee.
There you go. Learn faster, idiot. So let's also talk about this. It's my opinion. I don't want to speak for Brennan or the show or whatever, and it has I got to put this out there. It has nothing to do with the fact that we're on Ken McKinley's podcast network, but in my opinion, his Midnight series, anthology series, that's like the anthology everyone should strive to get in. And you got in that this year. Midnight Beyond the Stars. Can you tell us whatever you can about that? Because that's a big deal, and that's worth getting many pats on the back.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very pleased to have got into that anthology. It's very nice to get an invitation. And I wrote a story that's a little bit inspired by Barjavel's The Ice People, which I don't know. I think it's called The Ice People. I read it. I read it in the 90s, so that's dating myself a lot there. And I read it when I was living in France, and I read it in French. And it's a wonderful story about some ice. It's a Romeo and Juliet set under the ice. And so I subverted that trope into a sort of a story about, because this is Midnight Beyond the Stars, a story about a fleet of people on a spaceship bringing resources back to a version of Earth, and they discover these 2 creatures, people inside the ice, and then of course what might happen, what could go wrong, right? So so that's what the story was inspired by. So I was really, really pleased to get an opportunity to air that one. It was really rather fun. I did enjoy it.
Man, that's really cool. I love it when someone takes a twist on, like, a horror story that we all know and love from, say, the 80s or 70s or what have you. But what I find more interesting, if you're basing something off of fiction, is when you go back further to, and right behind Daron is it looks like a William Shakespeare collection.
Yes.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I really like it when people kind of base stuff off of the classics, like the true literature classics, and just put a horror spin on it. And sometimes it doesn't even need it. Like Moby Dick, for example, like that's really one step away from being a horror, isn't it?
Well, it's the original creature feature, isn't it? Really,
There you
of
go.
sorts.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, so that sounds fantastic. And that's not all for you, though. So can you please tell us in a braggadocious manner what you got going
on? I'm very pleased to have just signed a 3-book deal with Silver Shamrock to put out some short story collections. So I'm really excited about that. It's really lovely to be approached. And
Did he announce that yet?
Yes, I think so. I believe so. Yes, because
Yes.
I think Keelan is doing the cover, and I saw some really jazzy pop covers. They're looking really amazing. I think it's going to be called In the Mist or Inside the Mist is the series that I'll be writing. So I'm very, very pleased to. I'm really excited about that. I also have spin-off of my Black Crane's Tales of Unquiet Women anthology. I'm working on Unquiet Spirits, which is an essay collection with responses to Asian monsters. So that's a personal project that I'm working on. I'm just about to start the Grimshaw Sargison residency in Auckland for my poetry collection, Fox Spirit on a Distant Cloud. And I have this book coming out in about, well, this is on the 31st of May, so it'll have just come out when this It's called Mark My Words, and I'm writing it with Angela Yuriko Smith from Space and Time magazine, and Daron has read it for me. It's a book about basically, the things that your mentor wish you knew, and save me telling you over and over and over again. So I'm hoping that will speed things up for a lot of our HWA mentors if their mentees can have a quick read and maybe identify some things themselves. And then you can kind of hit the ground running, so you're not necessarily spending lots of time telling people how to format their documents, that kind of thing.
No, that's not. Well, today we're recording this 2 weeks before, but today the episode's out, the day of that release. So is there anything that you can tell us about that? Because that sounds like it's about everything this episode's about.
Well, I was having a conversation with Angela Yuriko Smith earlier in the year and said, oh my God, I've got so much work. How am I going? I want to take on more mentees, but I just haven't got the energy and the space, and I'm saying the same things over and over again. And anyway, so at the same time, the Brian Matthews and Jim Chambers were looking for people to present for StokerCon, and we said, whoa, this would be a good opportunity to talk with new writers and say, look, these are the things you can do to come up to speed quickly, so that, when you get in a mentor-mentee relationship, as Daron and I did, then you can very quickly hit the ground running and go for it, and really invest time in the novel and the actual work and the nitty-gritty of the things that need addressing, rather than formatting and those kinds of things. So it's not all about formatting. It was going to be a handout for that particular session, and then we said, we should reach out to our editor and publishing colleagues and find out, if they have any comments. And we got a whole screed of stuff back, and so what was going to be just a handout has turned out to be, I think, close to 50,000 words now. So we're providing a free book, but I hope it's a good. Well, Daron will probably. I'm not very objective. I hope it's going to be a useful, sort of a checklist for new writers starting out or wanting to submit, just to sort of say, where do I start with revising my novel before my short fiction, my novella, even an article, where do I start revising it before I send it out?
Are you going to be selling those? Because I definitely want to get it.
Yeah. We'll be getting it up on Amazon and stuff.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Or if you go to the horror universe, well, it's too late. By the time this airs, it'll be too late. But anyway, no, it'll be available and it'll be in print version as well. So
sweet, Daron, you read it. What do you got to say about it, man?
Hey, Daron, real quick, Lee's on the call, so just be careful.
Yeah, okay.
Daron, real quick, she's got a very sharp trophy or award.
Thankfully, she's on the other side of the world. So, no, it's fantastic. As I was reading it, I was sitting here, I was taken back to our session. Really, I was like, this is literally everything we talked about the first couple days, or first couple weeks rather, just getting the nuts and bolts together before we could really dive into the story per se. It's fantastic. It's basically everything I got out of the mentorship with minus Lee's looking directly at my work, right? That's the only thing that's not part of it, but everything that Lee taught me is in there. So there's a bit of, doing the work yourself, like understanding the principle and then, implementing it yourself. But if you think about it as a sort of precursor to going into the mentorship, if you miss stuff, they're going to help you figure that out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I finished it and I said, if I had gotten this, I sent Lee a message right afterward that said, if I had gotten this before we were paired together, I would have withdrawn and done an edit on my own, just with the information that's in there, right? And then I would have said, okay, let me take a semester off, and I'll do it next time. Because it's literally everything and more that we discussed.
That I just want to zero in on one thing you said, nuts and bolts of writing. I started pursuing being a novelist in 2013. And it wasn't really until I met Mark Cassell in 2019 where he kind of gave me a crash course. We co-wrote a short story for Camp Crystal Lake Publishing.
Crystal Lake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with Joe Meinhardt. Love that guy. But, and Lee, I know you've worked with him too, I think. Haven't you? No, second guessing myself. Oh, no.
No, I have had a short story published by Crystal Lake, but I've been on their guest program for sure.
All right, yeah, I wasn't talking about a novel. I thought you were in some form. Okay, anyways, Mark gave me a crash course in the nuts and bolts of writing, and after that, I was like, all right, something's finally happened. It took 6 years, but something's finally happening. That's really important. I think was it Tim Wagner's book? He kind of covers that, the nuts and bolts of it. And I'm sure it's a different way that he goes about it. But like, if I read that when I started out, I don't know, that's a game changer. You might just totally take down the mentorship program there, Lee, with this book.
Well, actually, Tim sent us a really nice endorsement, and he said, he said, I wished I'd had it to guide me when I was starting out. I would have decreased my learning curve by years. So that was really rather nice. So, I really do hope that it will save some time because, mentors are time poor. It's not that we don't want to give, but it does rob us of our own writing time. There's no two ways about it. Daron and I probably put in 100 hours, I would say. Just by the time we read stuff, went over stuff, talked about things, it just over the course of that, that mentorship. And I did it for three mentees in that period. So, it's a lot of time. It's sort of late night stuff and early morning stuff. And Daron had a specific goal in mind as well towards the end of his mentorship. So we sort of had to go hell for leather to sort of, because he wanted it to have a go at submitting it somewhere. And so, that sort of set some deadlines for us as well. And I think we just need to remember that the HWA mentors are not paid. So that is a lot that, it's not insignificant. And so if we can reduce at all the time spent telling people, use a serif font, and please don't use tabs in your work, and just those simple things, then that can really mean that when you get with your mentor, you can really hit the ground running, looking at the story elements and how to make it, really give us the scares, basically.
So you're talking about, I just got to ask about the tab thing, because I've seen that only on a few calls. You're talking about setting the indentation a certain...
Yes, use paragraphing, use styles or paragraphing to set
Gotcha.
your indents, and don't use a tab or a space bar. Delete, delete, delete. Yes. So
Okay.
Daron was not guilty of that. So I'm just putting that out there. He was guilty of using 3 adjectives where one would suffice, because that's that detail-oriented, technical writer. He had to put 3 adjectives or really go into the nitty-gritty. And I would say to him, Daron, do we really need to know this? Is this important? Well, because the reader is going to remember it, and if you don't use it later, they're going to be cross with you. So yeah. So he started crossing things out, and he got very good at it towards the end there.
What's like the biggest thing that newer writers have trouble with picking up at first?
Well, I think it depends on where they're on their own background. I mean, Daron had a very solid understanding of how to write a novel, because he'd come from a master's in creative writing background. So clearly he didn't have any issues with what a character was, what plot was. But just the nitty-gritty of some of those technical aspects, like getting the POV right for Daron was important. And show not tell a little bit. We had some issues around there, some stuff like that. Show not tell's a big one, and there's a place for telling and there's a place for showing. And so transitions is another one. That's always tricky, isn't it, Daron? And I didn't really cover that in the book because it's different for every novel. But generally, transitions is a tricky one too, because people want to write themselves into the story, and there's this big chunk of stuff at the top of the page, at the top of the chapter. You think, well, do we really need this? You can just chop it right out and get us to the action. So I think with Daron, we had a few times where his character was in the car, parks the car and going, no, just get us in the house, get us to the place. We don't need to see them parking the car all the time. But it's just how we get used to writing ourselves into a scene. So, I think it really depends on the writer. I've got a writer at the moment whom I'm working with, and her background is journalism, so it's all tell. It's all very factual tell, and so we're saying, no, this is horror. It's about fear. So we need to put the emotion in it, and we need to move away from telling and into showing. So it depends on your background a little bit, I think.
The whole show not tell thing. It's really hard to get down at first. Sometimes I still catch myself doing the telling and not showing. It's definitely a case by case thing. So I don't really, hats off to you. I don't really know how I would go about teaching that part.
That's the element that for me was transformative. Because I went through an MFA program and we had workshops and people were reading, my stuff, but the specific info that Lee was able to give me on my writing, which, you get that from people, your peers in a writing group, but they're not necessarily experts. The teacher's there, but they're not as involved. It's more, peer editing. So having someone literally diving into your work and saying, this is the issue, like, don't do it this way, do it this way. It clicks so much faster than just hearing the words show, don't tell. Like, what is that? It's kind of an amorphous term, right? Because sometimes you do want to tell. So for me, that was a big deal. Like, just having leads be able to say, okay, instead of doing this, do it this way. And
expand it out. I'd say expand the scene out. Write the dialogue. Show me your monster. what do you feel like when you see this monster? Give us the fear. And then Daron just dived in, and he once I said, how about this, he'd just go for it. And I think the other thing is that it's not my work. So, I was very invested in the work, and this is the part of the problem of mentorship, is that at the end of the day, you're very proud of it, but it's not your work. It's his book. But
Go spread your light.
Yeah, it's not. The fact is that at the end of the day, the decision is still the writers. They still must make that final decision, and they have to analyze it, think about it. Is what I'm saying right? Is it right for the work? And the thing is, I never said anything that I didn't feel would strengthen the work. We're not here to basically mollycoddle you, and nor are we there to rip your work to shreds and just for the sake of it. Why would we? We're putting in the time to try and make the strongest piece of work possible. That is still your work. I wouldn't mind if it were my work, but it's not. It's Daron's work. So, that's how it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, specifically with Daron, he's told me about 3 of his books, and I wish he'd stop because I just want to read it. It's not fair. It's like, hey, I got this really tasty pizza. You can't have any though. Not for a while. Just to add one more thing, and then Brennan, please jump in about cutting stuff that everyone knows about and doesn't have to read. This one editor, Doug Morano, posted a tweet when I think it was his last anthology. He was saying how he's going through stuff, and he goes, just basically, it was just like him be a nice way to tell people, you don't have to tell us when you go to sleep. You don't have to say when you're waking up. Start a story that way. Everyone does it. You don't have to write that in. And that's it. I kind of knew that, but I was like, I'm noting that. That's true. So it's stuff like that, and I'm bringing it up in case someone kind of needs to hear it, because
it's very good advice. If it's boring to write, it's boring to read, so don't write it. Yeah, just get us to the exciting bits. Just jump right there. Yeah, I work with children a lot, and they always do this. If you ask them to write a story about the beach, they'll tell you about how Mum put the picnic in the car, and then Dad loaded in the lilos, and then we drove, and then we stopped on the way and got petrol, and the first 3 pages is about getting to the beach, and then the story should just start at the beach. Just start at the beach. Don't worry about all the rest of it. So you're dead right. It's a really good piece of advice.
Brendan.
Daron, you mentioned before about how transformative it was with the show don't tell piece. I was wondering if you could talk about some of the other things that not just made the book you were focused on, the best it could be, but that you feel like have made you a stronger writer. Some of the real specific stuff you guys worked on that have made you a better writer than you were, X number of months ago.
Right. So kind of tagging on to what you were just saying, for me, part of my struggle was right before I started working on that novel, I had been writing comic scripts for years. And comic scripts kind of like a movie script, and there's a lot of stage direction. There's a lot of moving a character from scene to scene and room to room, and that was part of the issue that I was struggling with, and why I would see everything, right? You'd see all this movement because I was used to writing that way, and I was that was the struggle. Like, I knew there was an issue, but I wasn't sure what it was. So that was one of those things that Lee pointed out. Some of the others, the POV was a big one. I had written a novel, I think in 2013 maybe, and it was first person, and I'd written omniscient before for whatever stories and things, and technically the book was omniscient, and then once we started, Lee was like, this should be third person close, like really close on one narrator. So I went in and started doing that, and then when she looked at it, she's like, well, this is still omniscient. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's it's not, it's this. But it's subtle things. There's a lot of it had to do with the filters. That was a big part, which is still so banged into my head that anytime I see one of those, if I write it, I literally delete it. Just sort of, he saw something happen instead of just saying that it happened. Like it's in there now. And I notice it with other, like I'm always pointing it out to other people. Like when, somebody, if I'm reading someone's book, I'll point it out. Because it gets you so much closer to the character and to the experience. So that was a big one. Those things were all kind of related. The POV, getting rid of the filters. Some of the stuff like tautology, like you mentioned, I know I definitely did some of that. We definitely talked about that.
That's a weird word.
Yeah.
Tautology.
It makes a lot of sense, though.
It's repetitive.
Yeah, that stuff like, he trailed behind. Well, can you trail in front? He had a big smile on his face. Where else is your smile going to be? That sort of stuff. His heart beat in his chest. Well, unless you're an alien, your heart is in your chest. So some of the stuff was just really intuitive, and you just write it down because you're just getting it on the page. But actually, once you start nutting it out, you can make your work very lean, and then it becomes so pacey. And I think that's been a comment that Daron's had about his work, is that it's really breakneck speed, right? And so it's much pacier than it was. It was a little slower and a little bit more meandering and a little bit more slow police procedural. And now it really goes for it. So I think that getting rid of those little bits of clutter have really helped.
Yeah.
And you know what? Brennan and I do another podcast called Burying the Dead. Bring that up because we're reading older, like Shirley Jackson. What was it? Shirley. Wow, why is this slipping my mind? Haunting on Hill House. It's slow paced. The entire book's slow paced, and I mean, maybe that would be a big hit nowadays. Psycho was kind of a little, I loved that book, but Psycho was kind of a little bit slow paced. And just thinking about books written back in the 50s and the 60s, I don't know too much before then besides like Lovecraft, but they were a lot slower than nowadays. An audience nowadays wants, like you guys are saying, they want basically all the fat cut out. And when Chuck Palahniuk was saying how back, for quite a few years ago, if you say this whole thing about, you just info dump, someone sounds very smart back then. And nowadays it's not appealing in most cases.
No.
It's just like, why was this published?
Well, I say, things move on. We evolve, don't we? We know what, and readers are, much more time poor. They've got to squeeze their reading in around other things, and so they want to get to the point, get to the story, and we still need an emotional experience, and we still need all that background, but we need to get it in a way that's tight and lean and doesn't waste their time.
Yeah, and I mean, I've kind of learned it's a dance. It's like you feed them that information throughout the story with dialogue, like casual conversation or little context clues or what have you. Brennan, do you have anything else on this particular subject, or can I go to something else?
You know what? I was going to throw out real quick, as far as the viewpoint thing was concerned. I honestly do not remember whether it was you, Lee, or you, Daron, who said it, but basically the idea of writing third person close like you're writing first person, but just change the pronouns. I thought that was a great little piece of advice.
That's what made it click. I don't remember exactly what Lee said, but that's essentially what she said is, how to get from out here looking down at the character, even when you're just focused on one character, and getting all the way into the character's head. So writing third person as if it was first person, and just change the pronouns. That's pretty much how I've been writing ever since.
Lee, is it difficult adjusting from, I guess mainly North American from how New Zealanders write, maybe a different word? Or I know in the UK there's a lot more U's than in America. So I'm not too sure. I mean, me and Brennan have read quite a few authors in Australia. I don't think in New Zealand. Am I correct with that, Brennan?
Are you correct about what? That we haven't read a lot of New Zealand authors?
Yeah, I don't think we have. I don't know if
No.
I don't know if there's a big difference between New Zealand authors and Australian-based authors.
Okay, Lee's gonna hit us.
Look, I'm pleading my ignorance. I'm an ignorant American.
There's an ocean between us, mate.
Well, I know, but I don't know if there's
Literal
like
ocean.
I don't know what the difference is. Look, I'm saying I don't know. So don't kill
me. There are a lot of similarities between Australian English and New Zealand English, and there are lots of differences as well. We have our own little sort of local colloquialisms and sayings and expressions. And Dan Raybutts, who I write my Path of Ra series with from Raw Dog Screaming Press, we include those in there, and Raw Dog have been fantastic about incorporating those wherever they can, because that it adds to the flavor of the book and that sense of place. And of course, the story is set in urban Auckland in the near future, so it makes sense to have those things. But I think I think there's we need to just be open to it. I'm quite capable of selecting, American English on my word processing and making sure that I haven't missed, or haven't erroneously put in a New Zealand spelling when it should be an American spelling. And there are some turns of phrases and some, products and things that I might not be aware of. So that, I'm trying to be conscious of those things and ask the questions when I'm reading other people's work. But I think that's part of the beauty of language and of reading, isn't it? Is to go somewhere else and learn something else about the way people think and the way people describe things. And so I find it very enriching, to be honest. I think it is hard when you're trying to mix languages. And mark my words, we've got comments from editors who are from Australia and the UK and New Zealand. And so there's a lot of different types of spellings, and we've just left them in the spelling of the person. So the word processor did not like that at all. There are little wiggly lines everywhere. But I think that it does add a richness to writing, and we just need to be open to it. I wish Americans were more open to reading things that were outside the US, sort of vernacular. I think that it does offer something different, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't know a whole lot of people outside of the horror community that are like, yeah, I like foreign films if I get to read while I'm at a film. I like it. Korean films are a big love of mine, but they're phenomenal. But that's a great point. I wish that Americans were a lot of things too. That's open's definitely a big one of them.
I think horror is brilliant. I mean, I do, because I think already horror is a subversive genre. We're already looking at twisting things around and uncovering stones. And so I think in general, horror readers are way more open to that. Really, they are. And so that's quite refreshing compared to some other genres, I think.
Yeah. And you know what? I want to quote one of Daron's favorite authors. It was a recent post by Jonathan Jans, and it applies to what we've been talking about. He says, honestly, though, if I had to choose my favorite era for horror, it would be now. I think that I would agree with him because, look, we're all in 4 different parts of the world. We're talking about this. And this is what I love about the show. We get to bridge each other's walks of life. And, how else are we going to learn all about this, how else are we going to learn about what you experience, how we relate to each other? That's just kind of I don't know how to end this. I'm just saying that you guys were, Daron talked about Jans earlier, and I remember that tweet, and then I just looked it up to quote it correctly, and I don't know. Brennan saved me. I love it.
No, I love when you do your Michael Scott, I don't know where this sentence is going, but I'm going to keep on it anyway.
That's my ADD kicking in. It's like, just say it. It'll make sense. No, it won't. No one gets it.
I think Jonathan is totally right. There's never been a better time to be writing horror. We're living in pretty horrific times, so there's plenty of fodder, and and people are stuck at home to a large extent at the moment still, and so they're looking to read things that will either let them escape or at least let them deal with it. So I think he's dead right. I think there's never been a better time.
And how cool is that? Brennan's brought this up a few times. When the pandemic first hit, the publishers in the indie horror scene just were like, well, we're giving all our books away for free for some time to everyone who wants to read. Like, they're literally like, this is how I make money, but you know what? That's not important as much as like giving people a little relief during a pandemic. I don't know how the other genres handled it, but just to piggyback off of what y'all said, that's pretty special.
Yeah.
I don't know where to go from here. I'm done.
Well, I will. Go ahead, Lee.
I was going to say, why don't you ask Daron what his book's about? Because it's going to be coming. I know it's going to be coming soon. So why don't you ask him what it's about and what else he's writing? Because I don't know. I haven't got any heads up and insight into the other stuff that he's writing, and I know there is more.
Oh, definitely. That's one of the last questions, but we can jump to that. Before we do that, Daron, only if you're comfortable with it, you've mentioned Kevin twice. Is there anything that you want to tell people that don't know anything about Kevin?
Well, so I guess people who watch or listen to your show, that they would know him based on Jonathan mentioned him when he was on, Jonathan Jans, and how much of a promoter of horror he was. And yeah, he was my my biggest cheerleader. Really, he was the first person who read my novel the first time. He read it in a weekend, which was crazy, because at that time it was 110,000 words.
Holy shit!
It's down to 60. It's down to 67,000 thanks to Lee.
Wow.
Yeah, So he read it, and he had the balls to say, "Hey, I think you need to cut a third of it," and originally I had 3 time frames, that were all happening chapter by chapter. So you get a chapter in this decade and a chapter in this one and then this one. It was 3 different stories all happening at the same time. And he pointed out that like the third story just didn't work with the first 2. Like intentionally it was different, but it just didn't work for him. I struggled with that because the part that he wanted me to cut was actually the inspiration and the story I originally wanted to tell. So the main character, when I started writing him, he was just literally a throwaway character who shows up at this murder scene. Like, he wasn't intended to be anyone in the story. He was kind of, just setting the stage. It was someone else's story. So I literally just took a night and I just sort of thought about it and said, well, it really has become his story, like over the course of all these edits. So I did it. I just cut out the whole back section. And then because I did that, I had to change some stuff in the middle section because they were kind of related. So I ended up cutting half of it off the top and then had to rewrite the end, plus a lot of the stuff in the middle. Anyway, so he was the first person to do it, and he originally transformed it, and that's the version that Lee got afterwards. So she never actually read that version. That was a much longer version. But yeah, so last year, or just a little bit past, he took his own life, which was a big deal. So you think about, Lee mentioned how, everybody's kind of going through stuff, even if you're not affected by the pandemic, other than being at home, like it's affecting people in different ways. And I'm 100% sure that is the reason. Like, the sort of circumstances were based on that. So, that was definitely how it hit home for me.
All right. Thanks, man. Brennan, save me, sir.
So, Daron, I want to talk a little bit more about what you're working on and that novel. But before we do it, I kind of want to wrap up the mentor thing. Now, you guys might have to retread a little bit of ground with this question, but I'm thinking you guys kind of embody an idyllic mentor-mentee relationship. You guys have become friends, I think it's fair to say. There's a lot of mutual respect, and you would both agree that you work well together. And, obviously we're not going to get into specifics, but a lot, you hear horror stories about how mentor-mentee relationships can go bad when there's ego on the table, or Lee, something you've talked about a lot is that it's ultimately his project and his writing and his voice, and your job is to help him find that rather than just tell him straight out what to do. So my final question is, Lee, I'll start with you. What is the role of a mentor?
Yeah, it's like herding chickens, I think. It's probably a bit fairly fair, isn't it, Daron? We've sort of got lots of chickens running in different directions, and we got to bring them all together and sort of hope like hell we can get them in the coop is kind of where it is. Yeah, my role is kind of like to help with the gravy, to kind of sort of just make it as polished and as shiny as we possibly can before it goes out, but to help make that piece of writing the best it can be, and to grow a writer, because it isn't just about the writing, is it? I mean, I think Daron's come a long way in terms of his professionalism, his approach to the whole industry, in the way he approaches reading. He's reading critically, he's looking at things, he's reading in order to learn, in order to write. It's not just about, I mean, what is it King says, you can't write if you don't read. And I think that, I not know his words, obviously he uses prettier words than me, but I think that's kind of part of it. So for me as a mentor, it's basically, these should be wings, because that's what it is, isn't it? It's kind of like, just help them along the way, and hope that you're sort of, hey, creating a writer in your own image. But it's not like that at all. It's still their writing. So it's just, offering what you can, and ultimately it's up to the mentee to take what they can and run with it. And Daron's basically grasped everything with two hands and gone hell for leather down the other end of the football field, and scored a try, from what I can gather.
So Daron, the other side of the coin, what's the role of a mentee?
I'd say it's to listen and learn. Really, I know I talked about it a little bit in the article, but, and you sort of mentioned it, like checking your ego at the door. Like, Lee said it a couple times, she's not my mom. I'm not sending her stuff for her to tell me how awesome it is. I want to know, I need to know what doesn't work, right? And I think part of what works well for us is we're both pretty brutally honest. Like, and I appreciate that, because that's how I've always been. Going back to when I was in my MFA and reading other people's work, and like I'd get some looks from people because I would just say, like, this doesn't work, or I have no idea what this sentence means. Like, very, very direct. And Lee's the same. Like, she would say, this doesn't work, or, get rid of this. This doesn't make any sense.
I think
whatever.
It's not just saying it doesn't work. I think sometimes it's not even just a suggestion of, you could try this or you could try that. There are various ways of, it's not one fix,
Sure.
And it's entirely was Daron's decision about, and I would say, okay, I'm cutting this, and he doesn't have to keep the cuts that I'm saying. I think you should take this out, and this is the reason why. And at the end of the day, it was still Daron's decision. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it's like, I don't think a mentor should come in and just say this doesn't work, because that's not helpful. The writer already has an inkling. I think almost always the mentee will come to you and say, well, I'm worried about the readability, or I'm worried about the flow or the transitions or something, and they can't quite figure out the how, but they have worked out that there's an issue. almost always. They know it's not as sparkly as I want it to be. And Daron already knew that. He just couldn't put his finger on the how. And so we explored some possible hows, what could he do? And he was very open to that. And I think that there is that. It's that open-mindedness, being willing to say, okay, we've identified an issue. How are we going to move forward? What is the best way? And at the end, he had to take responsibility for that.
That's great. You know what? I just want to touch on honesty in writing. It's my opinion that not everyone should be a writer because of that, because not everyone's going to put the work in. And some people take your constructive criticism as a personal attack, and they'll get really defensive. I'd like to know from the two of you, and by all means disagree if you want. I just want to hear what you guys got to say. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think everyone is meant to be a writer, or?
You mean, can they be taught? Is that the question, really?
That might be a nicer way to put what I was saying.
Oh, like, is it, are writers made, or, are they born, or are they made? That kind of thing.
That's a smarter way to say what I was saying.
Well, I think already Daron had a huge amount of talent, and then he put in a huge amount of work. So that's a success. I think I'm a plodder. I don't really, I'm a scientist by profession. So, when I write with other people, for example, when I write with Dan Raybarts, and he a New Zealand writer, he's just got so much flair, and he just dives in, and I'm a slow plodder. So I think I'm kind of a, go to the edge of the page sort of writer. I'm sort of thorough. But I think some people have flair, and they're the lucky ones. But you can have flair and not put the work in, and you can be hardworking and just never quite get the sparkle. So I think it's the difference between, being a musician, and sometimes you can hear someone, two musicians play the same piece, and one of them puts their soul into it and has really studied hard and really worked out how to get the emotion out of that piece of music. And then the other will just play a technically perfect piece, and they're not the same. So I think it's it's like any art, isn't it? It's a little bit flair, it's a little bit hard work, and a lot of luck with publishing, unfortunately.
Nice. Yeah, perfect. Daron, what do you have to say?
Yeah, so I think anyone can write. It's a skill that we learn, in school. And I think that's where, you get the term, you hear people say, everyone's got a book in them, and that may be true.
But I don't want to read it.
Yeah, but the difference is the willingness to put in the work and to study really, and to be open to feedback. I could talk about horror stories of, I gave some people feedback and they never wanted to talk to me again, even though I didn't say they were a horrible person. I just said, whatever, like this, this isn't working for me, or whatever it was that I said. To me, that said they weren't really serious. Like if you can't objectively look at the work and say, okay, yeah, that maybe that doesn't work, at least think about it, then yeah, it's probably not the right field. Like I think about what I just said, like when Kevin didn't want to tell me to cut half of the book. Like he struggled with even telling it to me. And I thanked him for it, even though it was hard to hear. And I didn't tell him I was going to do it. I took some time and thought about it. But I know plenty of people who wouldn't have even taken the time. They would have just said, nah, this is my story. This is what I'm doing. So yeah, I think it is possible, but I don't know that how many people take it seriously to the level that it should be, if that makes sense.
Makes complete sense. Brennan has no hesitations, and I don't either with him, about telling each other how we feel about each other's work. And there's motivational content there too, but some of them are pretty funny. Just you can't get as honest with some people as you can with a close relationship like you guys have, or like we have, and that's awesome. And once you got that, never let it go. Brendan, before we go on to upcoming projects, you got anything?
No, go ahead and take us.
Lee, did we cover everything for your upcoming projects?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, got quite a few short stories in there go, and a couple of articles, and yeah, no, I'm busy. I've got
Yeah,
pretty
you
much
are.
everything contracted for a while. So, yeah, I usually put something free up in my newsletter every now and again, and so anyone wants to sign on to that, they can just find my website leemurray.info, and that usually keeps people up to date on sort of where I am on podcasts and conferences and what have you. So we're in person in New Zealand. So I'm in about 3 or 4 conferences coming up in New Zealand just in person. So that's kind of exciting.
Nice.
I've been missing that. Yeah.
How many
Darren.
mentees do you have right now?
Right now, just one.
Wow.
And she is a yeah, well, actually that's not true. I have all of the mentees that went before, but also I have about 6, but 4 or 5 of them are winding up, which is really rather nice. And I've got one that's in the middle of her, one from the HWA, and she is a journalist, and so she is unlearning telling. Because all the journalism she's done has been entirely telling, being very factual, and now she's moving into something so she's very good at that. So it's very hard to unlearn. Very clever lady, and I think it's going to be a very good piece. But it's the long haul when you have to unlearn something first and go forward. But just the one mentee that's really in the guts of their work at the moment, which is quite refreshing for me because sometimes I'm juggling quite a few.
Darren, what are your upcoming projects?
So the novel that I wrote and that Lee helped me edit, basically, I'm shopping that one currently. That was the supernatural crime noir. A lot of Lovecraftian sort of cosmic horror themes. Then I have 2 projects with another author, E. Lorne. We wrote one book that we are also shopping, which should be out this year, actually. That one is The Wicked Rex of the West, which is a mashup of The Wizard of Oz and Jurassic Park, of all things. It's
Fantastic.
it is as wacky as it sounds. It's really dark. We're not sure if it's quite horror. We think it's probably more dark fiction. We were thinking bizarro, but it's not quite that bizarre. And then so that one's done, and then we are finishing our second collaboration, which is a mashup. And I guess I should say we've basically decided that all of the projects we're going to do are going to be mashups of 2 different properties, like generally speaking. So we actually put a Twitter poll up back at the beginning of the year just to see what kind of things people throw us your ideas. Like, what are 2 franchises you would like to see thrown together? And we got some pretty crazy suggestions, which I wrote all of them down. I've got a list now that we can pull from for years to come. So the second one that we're almost done with is a mashup of Gremlins and I Am Legend.
That's awesome.
Which has been really interesting. E has talked about it a bit on Twitter, and I honestly think it's the best thing I've ever written, to be honest. It's really dark, but it's a very character-driven story, much more so than I would have thought. If you think Gremlins, I was thinking it was going to be like the first book, kind of funny and weird, but it's much more of the personal story of people surviving, an apocalypse. It's not zombies, it's gremlins.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
I want to read that.
It's interesting. I think so. Thinking about that book, and what surprised me the most is how little the gremlins are in it. They're not actually gremlins. We can't call them gremlins. But the creatures aren't in it as much. I kind of think about it in terms of how the zombie genre has sort of evolved, where the zombies are there and they're the menace, but they're not really the villains, right? It's the people The actual people are the problem, not the zombies. The zombies are slow. They're not hard to kill. The gremlins are a foot tall. They're not hard to kick into the foot out of the way. It's the people that you have to worry about, and that's absolutely what we found with the story. And it's been really cool. And then once we're done, I think our next one is going to be, and I don't even know how we're going to do this, Dead Space, the video game, mashed up with the Jungle Book. So I have
gonna give the children nightmares.
Yeah, I have no idea how that's gonna go, but I'm excited to jump into it.
I'm pretty sure no one else is doing that, so I think you're good to go.
That was why we talked about it, because we had such a good time with that first one. We're like, no one's doing this sort of story. And we were going to do something totally different because we really meshed as far as our writing styles. And then it just sort of clicked. It's like, no one else is doing this. Like, this is a genre unto itself. So we decided, let's just lean into it, right? Let's just be the mashup guys. And that's kind of the way we're going with it.
Should mash up Half-Life with another movie. I don't know if you played that video game. All right.
That might be on the list. I think I have 30 suggestions or more. So
let's talk about what we're currently reading. Who would like to go first? I'll go first, okay? So I am starting a new one tonight. It's, I believe, a novella, or it's a short novel. It is The Goddess of Filth by V. Castro. And I've only heard really good things about that, so I'm really looking towards that. Let's see. I just finished other books, so yeah, that's kind of the only one on my plate for right now. Lee, what are you reading?
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I think I've blurbed 3 books this week, and I'm just trying to think what they are. They're just. I did Kraken Fever, which is coming next week from Angela Eureka Smith and Kyra Starr, and it's actually a dark poetry collection. So it was amazing. It was amazing, really different. So I really enjoyed that. Who else did I read this week? Yeah, I should. Yeah,
3 blurbs in 1 week. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've been editing a youth anthology this week, and it's been huge. I've been doing it a decade, working with young people, and this particular project, we give all of the students feedback on their stories, and I had 122 to do, and so it was a lot of reading and a lot of writing, so my brain is a bit mush, so I apologize to the people whose books I should be shouting out right now that I haven't. So I read a lot, and yeah. I wish I could put my finger on the half a dozen books that I have been reading this week. No, they're not in my head.
That's all right. No, not a problem. Daron, how about you, man?
So my reading schedule is interesting because, with two kids, it's hard to even work in time to read. So I do most of my reading either at bedtime when I'm putting my kids to bed and I read on my phone, or when I take a 10, 15-minute break from work. So I'm usually reading a couple different things. I'm reading one thing when I'm putting them to bed and one thing here. So physical book, I'm reading Girl of Prey by Pete Risley from Grindhouse Press. Just started it. It's pretty good. I was just kind of drawn to the cover originally, and
yeah, it's a cool cover.
And then I'm just about finished with on an ebook, Chris Sorensen's The Nightmare Room, the first book in the Messy Man series. I'm finishing that right now, and then slowly but surely, I'm making my way through the President's book, and it's 800 pages, so it's going to take a little while for me.
Oh my god!
At my reading pace. So, yeah.
Have you crossed out any filtering in his book? You crossed out any filtering in there?
No, not really. It's really well written. It's really well written.
Yeah, I mean, unlike another president, he's a smart man. So
it's enlightening though. Like there's some of the stuff that he talks about in there. It's amazing. Yeah, definitely things you wouldn't have known. Like he starts all the way back when he was running for Chicago state, Senate and House, and just like his whole progression before he was president. It's really interesting, and just like a lot of the same stuff that we talk about, like how much of his life he had to sacrifice to do the things he wanted to do, not being around, for his kids during the week because he was going. I forget where the seat is in Chicago or in Illinois. It's not in Chicago. He lived in Chicago, but the state house was, 4 or 5 hours away, where I can't remember what city it is. But he talked about, he basically had an apartment that he lived in during the week, and he'd have to come back on the weekend to spend time with the family. So he missed a lot. And it's a lot of stuff that we do, right? We have to make those decisions sometimes. Like, I want to spend as much time with my kids, but I also want to get some writing done. So you have to make those trade-offs. So
yeah, I could have another episode just on that subject alone, man. Brennan.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lee. Go ahead.
I was going to say you've got to live to write.
Yeah.
You've got to experience some things, or you can't write. So
that's true.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have minded the $80 million advance though. That would.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I could have written that for $80 million.
Yeah.
I'm sure I could have come up with something.
And it's just book one. There's another one coming.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of that. You could afford to go live for a while and then come back and write it. I am currently reading. We have just scheduled our 100th episode with Mr. Joe Lansdale, so I am working through the complete drive-in right now.
Yeah.
Patrick appears to be frozen, so I hope this is still recording. Otherwise. And I'm going to also do a shameless self-promotion. I just got this in the mail today. Proletariat, edited by a whole bunch of great people, including Ian Bain, who's a name you might know. And, I have a story in here, but truth be told, I'm reading this right now not to reread my own work. That seems very arrogant and pompous. I'm reading it because... it's got stories by Haley Piper in it. It's got story by Laurel Hightower, Joanna Koch. It's killer, and I'm completely and utterly honored to be in the same table of contents as those three and many more really good writers that are in there.
I like the cover.
Yeah,
it's gorgeous.
Yep.
Yeah, and so Ian's in that one. He's the same mentor, period as Daron. So, yeah, fantastic. That's great news.
I liked his short story, Snap. I wanted to read. I wish it was longer, but I know you got a word count in there that you have to hit. So, but I liked it.
He's got some more stuff coming. So, yeah, I think he's doing very well. I think it's very promising. So, it's he. In his mentorship, because he's a teacher and he was writing this. Daron will know because they did some swaps, but he was writing this novella about scarecrows, zombie scarecrows, as you do, and from a YA perspective, and he had just kind of missed the opportunity to use that voice that young people have, and as a teacher he had incredible opportunity to sort of listen in and use it. So he rewrote his whole novella and it's come out really sharp, and so I happen to know that he's placed it, or it's a long short story now. It started as a novella and he did a bit like Daron, cut a third off it, and he has had that picked up. So I can't say anything more because I don't know if it's been announced yet, but he's a very promising writer. I'm very excited for him.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I remember you saying that in your article that you wrote for Kindle Reviews, talking about the scarecrows, and I'm like, this sounds kind of funny. It sounds very intriguing. Like, I want to know what he does with that in a YA scope or lens. Now, let's go to where can people follow you guys?
Yeah, I'm kind of on social media, but leemurray.info is my website, so I'm
That's
everywhere.
LEEMURRAY.
That's it.
What about you,
Thank
Darren?
Pretty much Twitter, and my handle is Daron K77, DARON K77. I'm on Facebook too. I'm not there a lot. Haven't set up a web page yet, but I do own my domain, so at some point that will be.
Get onto that. Get onto that.
That will be coming.
Next job. Yeah.
You heard it, man. She's a mentor.
No, it means I gotta do it.
Now, if you are interested in getting my mug on a coffee mug or on a mask or quite a few other things, go to deadheadspace.com. Click on the store tab. You can check out the merchandise. Don't get it for kids. My face is scary. Looks like a zombie. I want to know if you guys have any final thoughts, opinions, comments, sounds, or anything else before we wrap this up.
I think I'll finish with the same way I finished the article, which is, if you're thinking about doing it, if you're thinking about, finding a mentor, if you struggle, I see people talking all the time on Twitter, like, how do I find beta readers? How do I find people to read my stuff? Find whatever your genre, find something like the Horror Writers Association, join it and join a mentor program. Working with someone who has been doing it is invaluable. There's no other way to put it. I've said that before. I've spent years studying writing and literature, and I feel like I learned more in the 4 months with Lee than I did, for years, just because it was so personalized. So yeah, I would say, do it and be open-minded.
How about you, Lee?
Yeah, I think on the other side of the coin, there is always more mentees than mentors. And, I think that there are a lot of us that have skills that could step up that don't. And, people are screaming out for help, but also there's so much to learn when you do it. And it's a reciprocal sort of thing. So not to be frightened. You don't have to be a New York Times bestseller. You don't have, you don't have to know everything. You just have to know something, and you just have to be a little bit ahead of, well, not ahead, but you need to have done something that perhaps your mentee hasn't. So when you go to approach those places, let them know what your skills are, where you feel confident, and areas that you don't feel confident. I was once paired with someone who was looking for, connections into the screenwriting, horror screenwriting. And I said, I have none of those skills, so don't match me. He's going to be disappointed, and I think, so, fit is really important. So, if you think you've got some skills, and you don't have to be, way down the track to have skills, then definitely put your hand up, and they're screaming out for help, and you could end up with a relationship like Daron and mine, where we've become friends, and and it's connection is what horror is all about. So put your hand up, get connected. That's what I would say.
Fantastic. Brennan, any final thoughts or so forth?
I would thank you guys both for spending your whatever the hell night this is. It's a Tuesday. Spending your Tuesday night, unless you are Lee and you are in the future and it's Wednesday morning or early afternoon.
Afternoon.
Thank you guys for spending some time with us. Lee, you're a delight. I'm so happy we could have you on. And Daron, you're a wonderful dude. I'm glad we could make this happen.
We appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a delight.
Absolutely. And definitely echo that. So next episode 92, is with Vic LeMay Mist this Thursday. Stay tuned for that. And I would just like to end with this. It is on Lee's article. While director Steven Spielberg states the delicate art of being a mentor is not creating them in your own image, but giving them the opportunity to create themselves. Now, we cover that quite thoroughly, and by we, I mean Daron and Lee. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time. I hope that this helps quite a few people, and I'm sure it will. And you got many choices, listeners, and podcasts. Thank you for choosing us.